General Marcus Blackwood strutted across the military base with his chest puffed out like a peacock showing off its feathers. His polished boots clicked against the concrete floor, echoing through the training facility. At 52 years old, he had spent 30 years climbing the military ladder, collecting medals and commendations like a child collects baseball cards. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, his gray hair slicked back with precision, and his mustache trimmed to military regulation standards. The general had earned his reputation through traditional warfare strategies and old-school military tactics. He believed in discipline, hierarchy, and the unquestionable authority that came with his rank. To him, the military was a man's world, and women soldiers were still a novelty that he barely tolerated. He had fought tooth and nail against the integration of female combat units, arguing that women lacked the physical and mental strength required for serious military operations. On this particular Tuesday morning, Blackwood was conducting his weekly inspection of the base. He walked through the barracks, the mess hall, and the training grounds with his aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, trailing behind him like a loyal dog. The general's eyes scanned everything with the intensity of a hawk hunting for prey. He was looking for any sign of weakness, any breach of protocol, any excuse to demonstrate his authority. As they approached the advanced training sector, Blackwood noticed a group of soldiers engaged in hand-to-hand combat exercises. The facility was state-of-the-art, equipped with the latest training equipment and obstacle courses designed to push even the most elite soldiers to their limits. The air was thick with the sound of grunting, the thud of bodies hitting mats, and the sharp commands of drill instructors. Among the trainees, one figure caught his attention, a female soldier, no more than 5 feet 6 inches tall, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, was sparring with a male soldier who was easily 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier than her. What irritated Blackwood wasn't her presence in the training exercise, but rather the fact that she seemed to be holding her own against her larger opponent. The woman moved with fluid grace, dodging punches and delivering precise counterattacks that left her sparring partner stumbling backward. Her technique was flawless, her timing impeccable, and her confidence unwavering. She fought like someone who had been trained by the best instructors in the world, someone who had seen real combat and emerged victorious. But General Blackwood saw none of this skill or expertise. All he saw was a woman who, in his opinion, was probably getting special treatment because of her gender. He assumed she was being allowed to win, that her male opponents were going easy on her, and that the whole exercise was nothing more than political correctness run amok. "Peterson," he barked to his aide, "what's that woman doing in the advanced combat training program?" Lieutenant Colonel Peterson glanced at his clipboard nervously. "Sir, she's part of the Special Operations Training Program. Her records show exceptional performance in all areas of combat training, weapons proficiency, and tactical analysis." Blackwood snorted dismissively. "Exceptional performance? Look at her, Peterson. She's barely bigger than my teenage niece. How can someone like that possibly compete with our real soldiers?" As if on cue, the female soldier executed a perfect takedown maneuver, sending her much larger opponent crashing to the mat with a resounding thud. The move was so swift and precise that even the other trainees stopped their exercises to watch. The drill instructor nodded approvingly and called for the next pair of sparring partners. The general's face reddened with annoyance. He had always prided himself on being able to spot natural talent and leadership potential in his soldiers, but something about this woman rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was her confident demeanor, or the way she carried herself with the same authority that he had worked 30 years to earn. Whatever it was, he decided that she needed to be put in her place. "I'm going to go have a word with this so-called exceptional soldier," Blackwood announced, straightening his uniform jacket and adjusting his cap. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, perhaps we should continue with the scheduled inspection. We have 3 more facilities to review before lunch." But Blackwood was already striding toward the training mat, where the female soldier was now receiving feedback from her instructor. His jaw was set in determination, and his eyes had that cold, calculating look that his subordinates had learned to fear over the years. The woman had just finished toweling off the sweat from her intense training session when she noticed the general approaching. She straightened up instinctively, recognizing the rank insignia on his uniform, but there was no fear or nervousness in her posture. Instead, she maintained the relaxed confidence of someone who was completely comfortable in their own skin. "Soldier," Blackwood called out as he drew near, his voice carrying the commanding tone that he had perfected over decades of military service. The woman turned to face him, her dark eyes meeting his gaze directly. "Yes, sir." Blackwood looked her up and down with obvious disdain. Her uniform was regulation, her posture was correct, and her response was appropriately respectful. But none of that mattered to him. In his mind, she was still just a woman playing dress-up in a soldier's uniform. "I've been watching your little performance here," he said, gesturing dismissively toward the training mat. "Very impressive show you've put on for your audience." The woman's expression remained neutral, but Peterson could see a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was not pleased with the general's condescending tone. "I was simply participating in the scheduled combat training exercise, sir," she replied evenly. Blackwood chuckled, but there was no humor in the sound. "Combat training? Is that what we're calling it now?" He stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "Let me tell you something, little girl. This isn't a game. This isn't some feminist fantasy where women can do everything men can do. This is the real military, where real soldiers prepare for real combat situations." The other trainees had begun to notice the confrontation, and training activities gradually slowed as more and more people turned to watch what was happening. The drill instructors looked uncertain about whether they should intervene or simply observe. "I understand that, sir," the woman responded, her voice remaining calm and professional despite the obvious provocation. "Do you?" Blackwood's voice rose slightly. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're getting special treatment. I bet your sparring partners have been instructed to go easy on you, haven't they? I bet the instructors have been told to give you passing grades regardless of your actual performance." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Peterson winced, knowing that his superior was crossing lines that should never be crossed, but feeling powerless to intervene without risking his own career. The female soldier's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, I can assure you that I have received no special treatment. I have earned my position in this program through merit alone." Blackwood laughed outright now, a harsh sound that echoed through the training facility. "Merit? You want to talk about merit?" Without warning, he reached out and grabbed a handful of her ponytail, giving it a sharp tug that jerked her head backward. "This is what I think of your so-called merit." The entire training facility fell silent. The only sounds were the hum of the ventilation system and the distant noise of machinery from other parts of the base. Everyone present understood that they had just witnessed something that went far beyond inappropriate behavior and entered the realm of assault. The woman's eyes flashed with anger, but she maintained her composure with remarkable self-control. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable edge of steel. "Sir, I would strongly advise you to remove your hand from my person immediately." But Blackwood was too caught up in his demonstration of dominance to recognize the warning in her tone. He still had his fingers wrapped around her ponytail, and he used his grip to force her to look directly at him. "You'll speak when spoken to, soldier," he snarled. "And you'll remember that I am a general in the United States Army. You will show me the respect that my rank deserves." What General Marcus Blackwood didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known because it was classified at the highest levels of government, was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his military career. The woman whose hair he was gripping, the soldier he was publicly humiliating and physically assaulting, was not just another trainee working her way through the system. Her name was Colonel Sarah Chen, though very few people knew her real name or her true rank. To most of the military establishment, she was simply Ghost, a legendary figure whispered about in the darkest corners of the intelligence community. She was the commander of the most elite black operations unit in the entire Department of Defense, a group so secret that their existence was known only to a handful of people at the very highest levels of government. For the past 15 years, Colonel Chen had led missions that officially never happened in countries that the United States was not officially operating in. She had eliminated terrorist leaders, rescued captured diplomats, and prevented international incidents that could have sparked global conflicts. She had been shot, stabbed, tortured, and left for dead more times than most soldiers could imagine, and she had always found a way to complete her mission and bring her team home alive. She was currently undergoing what appeared to be routine combat training, but was actually a carefully orchestrated evaluation of new techniques and technologies that her unit might need in future operations. The other trainees and instructors had been told she was a mid-level officer on a special assignment, which was technically true, just not in the way they assumed. And now, this pompous, overconfident general was manhandling her in front of dozens of witnesses, completely unaware that he was assaulting one of the most dangerous and highly trained operatives in the entire United States military. Colonel Chen could have ended the confrontation in a dozen different ways, each of which would have resulted in General Blackwood requiring immediate medical attention. She could have broken his wrist, dislocated his shoulder, or rendered him unconscious before he even realized he was in danger. But she was also acutely aware that she was surrounded by witnesses and that any retaliation on her part could compromise her cover and potentially expose her unit's existence. So instead, she did something that required far more discipline and self-control than any combat maneuver she had ever performed. She stood perfectly still, maintaining eye contact with Blackwood, and waited to see how far he was willing to push this confrontation. The general, emboldened by what he interpreted as submission, tightened his grip on her hair and leaned closer to her face. "That's better," he said with satisfaction. "Now you're starting to understand how things work around here." Peterson could feel his career flashing before his eyes as he watched his commanding officer commit what amounted to sexual assault in front of a room full of witnesses. He knew he should say something, do something, but 30 years of military conditioning had taught him never to question a superior officer, especially not in public. The drill instructors exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to handle a situation where a general was clearly out of line but still technically their superior. The trainees watched in horrified fascination, many of them recording the incident on their phones despite regulations prohibiting the use of personal devices during training. And through it all, Colonel Sarah Chen stood motionless, her dark eyes fixed on General Blackwood's face, with an intensity that should have warned him that he was making a catastrophic error in judgment. But Marcus Blackwood had spent so many years surrounded by people who feared him, people who would never dare to challenge his authority, that he had completely lost the ability to recognize when he was in real danger. He was about to learn that lesson in the most humiliating way possible. The tension in the training facility had reached a breaking point. General Blackwood still had his fingers wrapped around Colonel Chen's ponytail, completely oblivious to the fact that he was seconds away from discovering just how wrong his assumptions had been. The woman he was treating like a helpless recruit had killed enemy combatants with her bare hands, had survived torture sessions that would have broken most men, and had commanded missions that had saved thousands of American lives. Just as Blackwood opened his mouth to deliver another condescending lecture, the facility's main doors burst open with a thunderous bang that echoed through the building like a gunshot. A group of men in dark suits entered with the purposeful stride of people who were accustomed to having their authority respected without question. These were not ordinary government officials. They moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, their eyes constantly scanning for threats, their hands positioned near concealed weapons. At the head of this group was a man who commanded immediate attention without saying a word. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings in a single glance. His suit was expensive but understated, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who wielded enormous power behind the scenes. This was Director James Morrison, the head of the Department of Defense's most classified operations division. Very few people in the military knew who he was, and even fewer knew what his organization actually did. He reported directly to the Secretary of Defense and had authorization to conduct operations that existed in the gray areas between military action and espionage. Morrison's presence at the base was not coincidental. He had come to personally debrief Colonel Chen on her latest mission and to discuss potential future operations that would require her unique skills. What he found instead was his most valuable operative being publicly humiliated by an ignorant general who had no idea what he had stumbled into. "General Blackwood," Morrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade. His tone was calm and controlled, but there was an underlying authority that made everyone in the room instinctively straighten up. Blackwood turned toward the voice, still maintaining his grip on Chen's hair. His face showed annoyance at being interrupted during what he considered a necessary disciplinary action. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "This is a restricted military facility, and I don't recall authorizing any civilian visitors." Morrison reached into his jacket pocket and produced a leather credential case, which he opened to reveal identification that made Blackwood's eyes widen in surprise. The badge was unlike anything the general had seen before, with clearance levels that exceeded even his own substantial security authorization. "Director James Morrison, Department of Defense Special Operations Division," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "And you, General?" are currently assaulting one of my operatives." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Blackwood's hand loosened slightly on Chen's hair, but he didn't release her completely. His military training told him to defer to higher authority, but his ego refused to acknowledge that he might be in the wrong. "Your operative?" Blackwood scoffed, though there was less confidence in his voice than before. "This is just another female recruit who thinks she can play soldier. I was simply teaching her about military discipline and respect for rank." Morrison's expression didn't change, but several of his men shifted slightly, their body language subtly becoming more aggressive. These were not bureaucrats or political appointees. They were former Special Forces operators who had been recruited specifically because of their loyalty and their willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect national security interests. "General," Morrison said with deadly calm, "I'm going to give you exactly 3 seconds to remove your hand from Colonel Chen's person before this situation escalates in ways that will end your career and possibly your freedom." The title hit Blackwood like a physical blow. "Colonel?" he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. His grip on Chen's hair went completely slack as the implications began to sink in. If this woman was really a colonel, then she outranked most of the officers on the base. More importantly, if she was under the protection of someone with Morrison's obvious authority, then Blackwood had just made an enemy of people who could destroy his life with a single phone call. But it was too late for backing down now. Too many people had witnessed his behavior, and his pride refused to let him admit that he had been wrong. Instead, he doubled down on his aggression, making the situation infinitely worse for himself. "I don't care what rank she's supposed to have," he declared loudly enough for everyone in the facility to hear. "No woman belongs in combat operations, regardless of what some politically correct bureaucrats in Washington might think. This is about maintaining military standards and discipline." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the trainees who had been recording the incident on their phones stopped moving, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Director Morrison's face remained expressionless, but Colonel Chen finally spoke, her voice carrying a tone that sent chills down the spines of everyone present. "General Blackwood," she said quietly, "you have exactly 10 seconds to apologize for your behavior and request forgiveness for your actions. If you choose not to take advantage of this opportunity, I guarantee that you will regret that decision for the rest of your life." Blackwood laughed, a harsh sound that revealed just how completely he misunderstood the gravity of his situation. "Apologize? To you? You're threatening me now? That's insubordination, soldier, and I could have you court-martialed for that." Morrison nodded to one of his men, who immediately produced a secure satellite phone and began making a call. Within seconds, he was connected to someone at the highest levels of government, someone who had the authority to make decisions that could alter the course of military careers in real time. "Sir," the operative spoke into the phone, "we have a Code 7 situation involving General Marcus Blackwood and one of our assets, requesting immediate authorization for protective action." While this conversation was taking place, Colonel Chen had reached the end of her patience. She had endured Blackwood's ignorance, his sexism, and his physical assault with remarkable restraint, but his refusal to acknowledge his error when given multiple opportunities to do so had pushed her beyond her breaking point. "General," she said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who was accustomed to commanding life-and-death operations, "since you seem to be confused about military standards and discipline, allow me to educate you." What happened next occurred so quickly that most of the witnesses would later have trouble describing exactly what they had seen. Colonel Chen moved with fluid precision, her body becoming a weapon honed by years of combat training and real-world experience. In less than 2 seconds, General Blackwood found himself flat on his back on the training mat, his arm twisted behind his body in a position that caused excruciating pain without actually breaking any bones. The move was executed with such perfect technique that even the drill instructors, who were experts in hand-to-hand combat themselves, could only stare in amazement. Chen had used Blackwood's own weight and momentum against him, turning his aggressive posture into a liability that she exploited with surgical precision. "This," she said calmly while maintaining the painful hold on his arm, "is what actual military discipline looks like. This is what happens when someone who has never seen real combat tries to intimidate someone who has spent their entire adult life preparing for and engaging in the most dangerous operations imaginable." Blackwood struggled against her grip, but every movement only increased his pain. He tried to use his superior size and strength to break free, but Chen's technique was flawless, and her position gave her all the leverage she needed to maintain control. "You see, General," she continued in the same conversational tone she might use to discuss the weather, "while you were sitting in comfortable offices, pushing papers and playing political games, I was leading missions in countries whose names you probably can't even pronounce. While you were attending cocktail parties with other desk warriors, I was training with the most elite Special Forces units in the world." Director Morrison watched the scene with satisfaction, knowing that his operative was not only defending herself but also sending a message to everyone present about the consequences of underestimating people based on their gender or appearance. "I have personally eliminated more enemy combatants than most infantry companies see in an entire deployment," Chen continued, applying just enough pressure to Blackwood's arm to remind him of his helpless position. "I have prevented terrorist attacks that would have killed thousands of innocent people. I have rescued American hostages from situations that other military units considered impossible." The operative with the satellite phone approached Morrison and whispered something in his ear. The director nodded and then addressed the room in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "what you are witnessing is a demonstration of why Colonel Chen commands the most elite black operations unit in the United States military. Her security clearance is higher than that of most generals, and her operational authority comes directly from the highest levels of government." Blackwood's face had gone completely white as the reality of his situation finally began to penetrate his arrogance. He was not just being humiliated by a random female soldier. He was being systematically destroyed by someone who operated at levels of military authority that he could barely comprehend. "Colonel Chen has successfully completed over 200 classified missions," Morrison continued, "many of which involved situations where failure would have resulted in international incidents or significant loss of American lives. She has been awarded decorations that are so classified that their existence cannot be publicly acknowledged." Peterson, who had been watching the entire confrontation in horrified fascination, finally found his voice. "Sir," he said to Morrison, "General Blackwood didn't know. If he had been properly briefed about Colonel Chen's status, this never would have happened." Morrison turned his cold gaze on the lieutenant colonel. "Ignorance is not an excuse for assault, Officer Peterson, and the general's behavior suggests that this is not an isolated incident, but rather a pattern of inappropriate conduct toward female military personnel." As if summoned by Morrison's words, 3 military police officers entered the training facility. They moved with the same professional efficiency as Morrison's men, and their purpose was immediately clear to everyone present. "General Marcus Blackwood," the senior MP announced, "you are under arrest for assault on a superior officer, conduct unbecoming an officer, and violation of military regulations regarding respectful treatment of fellow service members." Chen finally released her hold on Blackwood's arm and stepped back, allowing him to struggle to his feet. His uniform was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and his face showed the kind of humiliation that comes from having one's fundamental assumptions about the world completely shattered in front of an audience. "This is impossible," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "She's just a woman. Women can't be special operations commanders. Women don't have that kind of authority." Morrison approached Blackwood with the measured steps of a predator closing in on wounded prey. "General, your outdated attitudes and your inability to recognize excellence when you see it have just ended your military career. But more than that, your assault on Colonel Chen has potentially compromised one of our most valuable intelligence assets." The full scope of Blackwood's error was finally becoming clear, not just to him but to everyone who had witnessed the confrontation. This was not simply a case of sexual harassment or inappropriate behavior. It was a breach of national security that could have far-reaching consequences for ongoing military operations. "Colonel Chen's identity and position are classified at the highest levels," Morrison continued relentlessly. "The fact that this incident occurred in front of so many witnesses means that we now have a potential security breach that will require immediate and comprehensive damage control." As the military police moved to escort Blackwood from the facility, he turned back to look at Colonel Chen one final time. She stood perfectly straight, her uniform somehow still immaculate despite the physical confrontation, her expression calm and professional. She looked exactly like what she was, one of the most dangerous and highly trained operatives in the entire United States military. "I'm sorry," Blackwood said quietly, the words barely audible above the sound of his own footsteps on the concrete floor. Chen regarded him with the same steady gaze that had intimidated enemy interrogators and foreign intelligence agents around the world. Your apology is 30 years too late, General. And it's not just me you owe it to. The military police escorted General Blackwood from the training facility in handcuffs, his career and reputation destroyed in a matter of minutes. As the heavy doors closed behind him with a final, echoing clang, the remaining witnesses stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just experienced. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning system and the distant noise of normal military operations continuing elsewhere on the base. Director Morrison surveyed the room with calculating eyes, mentally cataloging every face present and assessing the potential security implications of what had just occurred. His primary concern was not Blackwood's humiliation or even his arrest. It was the fact that Colonel Chen's cover had been blown in front of dozens of people who were not cleared to know about her true identity and position. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison announced, his voice cutting through the silence with surgical precision, "what you have witnessed here today is classified at the highest levels of national security. Each of you will be required to sign non-disclosure agreements, and any violation of those agreements will be considered an act of treason punishable under the full extent of military and federal law." The trainees and drill instructors nodded nervously, understanding that they had inadvertently become part of something much larger and more serious than a simple training exercise gone wrong. Several of them were already deleting the video footage they had recorded on their phones, realizing that possession of such material could land them in federal prison. Colonel Chen, meanwhile, had retrieved her towel and was calmly cleaning the sweat from her face as if nothing unusual had happened. Her composure was remarkable, considering that she had just been forced to reveal her true identity and capabilities to preserve her personal safety and maintain military discipline. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson approached Morrison with obvious trepidation, his career flashing before his eyes as he considered his own complicity in Blackwood's behavior. "Sir," he said quietly, "what should I tell the base commander about General Blackwood's arrest?" Morrison turned his attention to Peterson, studying him with the same intensity he might use to evaluate a potential intelligence asset. "You will tell Colonel Harris that General Blackwood has been relieved of command pending an investigation into conduct unbecoming an officer. The details of that investigation are classified, and any questions should be directed to my office." Peterson swallowed hard and nodded, understanding that his own career would likely be scrutinized as part of the fallout from this incident. He had been Blackwood's aide-de-camp for 2 years, and military investigators would want to know what he had known about his superiors' attitudes toward female personnel and why he had failed to prevent this confrontation. As Morrison's team began the process of securing the scene and interviewing witnesses, Colonel Chen walked over to where the director was standing. Despite everything that had just happened, her primary concern was not her own situation but rather the potential impact on her ongoing operations and the safety of her team members. "Director," she said quietly, "we need to discuss the operational implications of this exposure. I have 3 missions scheduled for the next 6 weeks, and my team is currently deployed in 2 different theaters. This incident could compromise not just my effectiveness but their safety as well." Morrison nodded grimly, having already begun calculating the same concerns. "We'll need to accelerate the timeline for Operation Nightfall, and potentially abort the Belgrade assignment entirely. Your cover identity will need to be completely reconstructed, and we may have to extract your people from the field until we can assess the full scope of the security breach." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Harris, the base commander, who had been summoned by his aide after reports of the incident began filtering up through the chain of command. Harris was a competent officer who had spent his entire career in conventional military roles, and he was clearly unprepared to deal with the complexities of classified operations and intelligence personnel. "Director Morrison," Harris said after quick introductions were made, "I need to understand what just happened in my facility. General Blackwood is being arrested. My personnel are being required to sign classified documents, and I have a colonel on my base who apparently outranks half of my staff despite the fact that I've never heard of her." Morrison gestured toward a quiet corner of the facility where they could speak without being overheard by the remaining witnesses. "Colonel, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that exceed your current security clearance, but the situation requires that you be briefed on the basic facts." Over the next 20 minutes, Morrison provided Harris with a carefully edited version of Colonel Chen's background and mission responsibilities. He explained that she was conducting classified training exercises at the base as part of ongoing special operations requirements, and that Blackwood's assault on her represented both a criminal act and a potential breach of national security. Harris listened with growing amazement and concern, realizing that his base had become the site of an intelligence incident that could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. His primary worry was ensuring that his personnel and his facility would not be negatively impacted by circumstances beyond their control. "Sir," Harris said when Morrison had finished his briefing, "what do you need from me to resolve this situation? My people are good soldiers who were following orders and conducting routine training exercises. They shouldn't be punished for Blackwood's failures." Morrison appreciated the base commander's directness and his concern for his personnel. "Colonel Chen's training exercise will be concluded immediately, and she will be transferred to another facility. Your people will be debriefed and required to sign non-disclosure agreements, but there will be no negative consequences for anyone who is simply performing their assigned duties." While these discussions were taking place, news of Blackwood's arrest was already spreading through the military's informal communication networks. The general's fall from grace was particularly satisfying to the many female military personnel who had experienced his condescending attitudes and inappropriate behavior over the years. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, who worked in the base's administrative offices, was among the first to hear about what had happened. She had been subjected to Blackwood's sexist comments during a previous inspection, and she immediately called her friend, Captain Jennifer Walsh, to share the news. "You're not going to believe this," Rodriguez said excitedly into her phone, "but General Blackwood just got arrested for assaulting a female officer during a training exercise. Apparently, she turned out to be some kind of special operations commander who completely kicked his ass in front of everyone." Similar conversations were taking place throughout the base and at military installations around the world as word of Blackwood's humiliation spread through social media and unofficial communication channels. The story was particularly popular among female service members, who saw it as vindication for years of discrimination and mistreatment. Captain Walsh, who was stationed at a base in Germany, immediately shared the news with her colleagues. "It's about time someone put that arrogant bastard in his place," she told her fellow officers. "I've been waiting for years for someone to expose him for the sexist pig that he really is." The speed with which news of the incident spread presented additional security challenges for Morrison's team. While the specific details of Colonel Chen's identity and mission responsibilities remained classified, the basic facts of Blackwood's arrest and the circumstances surrounding it were becoming public knowledge throughout the military community. Within 48 hours, military news websites were reporting on Blackwood's arrest, though they were careful to avoid any mention of classified details. The official statement described the incident as involving conduct unbecoming an officer and assault on a fellow service member. But speculation about the real story was rampant in military forums and social media groups. The Pentagon's Public Affairs Office found itself in the difficult position of trying to manage the story without revealing classified information or compromising ongoing operations. Their official statement was deliberately vague. "General Marcus Blackwood has been relieved of command pending an investigation into alleged misconduct. The Department of Defense takes all allegations of inappropriate behavior seriously and will pursue appropriate disciplinary action." Meanwhile, Colonel Chen was already adapting to the new reality of her compromised cover identity. Within 72 hours of the incident, she had been relocated to a secure facility where intelligence analysts were working around the clock to assess the potential impact of her exposure and develop new operational protocols. The woman who had been known as Ghost to her enemies and allies alike would need to disappear completely, replaced by new identity documents, new operational procedures, and new cover stories that could protect her future missions. It was a process that she had undergone before, but never under such public circumstances. Her team members, scattered across multiple continents on various assignments, were quietly extracted from their positions and brought back for debriefing and reassignment. The Belgrade operation, which had been months in planning, was scrubbed entirely, potentially allowing a terrorist cell to escape justice but preserving the safety of American operatives. The financial cost of Blackwood's moment of arrogance was enormous. The aborted missions, the compromised intelligence networks, and the resources required to rebuild Chen's operational capacity were estimated at over $50 million. More importantly, the delay in ongoing operations could have strategic implications that wouldn't be fully understood for years to come. General Blackwood himself was facing a court-martial that would almost certainly result in a dishonorable discharge and the loss of his military pension. At 52 years old, with no civilian job experience and a criminal record that included assault charges, his future looked bleak indeed. But perhaps the most significant consequence of the incident was the broader conversation it sparked about gender equality and discrimination in the military. Colonel Chen's story, while heavily redacted for security reasons, became a symbol of the capabilities and contributions of female service members who had been underestimated and mistreated by their male counterparts. Military academies began using the incident as a case study in leadership training courses, focusing on the importance of judging personnel based on merit rather than gender or physical appearance. The lesson was clear. Assumptions based on prejudice could have catastrophic consequences, both for individual careers and for national security. 3 months after the incident, Colonel Chen had successfully transitioned to her new identity and resumed her operational duties under a completely different cover. Her first mission under the new protocols was a complete success, resulting in the capture of a high-value terrorist target and the prevention of a planned attack on American interests abroad. General Blackwood, meanwhile, was serving his sentence in a military prison, his dreams of a distinguished retirement replaced by the reality of dishonor and disgrace. His case became a cautionary tale told in military circles, a reminder that arrogance and prejudice could destroy even the most successful careers in a matter of moments. But for Colonel Chen and her team, the incident at the training facility was simply another obstacle overcome in their ongoing mission to protect American interests around the world. They had adapted, evolved, and continued their work, proving once again that true excellence cannot be diminished by the ignorance or prejudice of others. The woman who had once been known as Ghost was already becoming a legend under her new identity, continuing to serve her country with the same dedication and skill that had made her one of the most effective operatives in the history of American special operations. And somewhere in the shadows, she was already planning her next mission, ready to prove once again that excellence recognizes no boundaries except those imposed by small minds and smaller hearts.